Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. I have so familiarized myself with the history of writing, or the history of books, the history of the alphabet and books together. They're fairly intertwined. I've so familiarized myself with it, I think I can do a fair job of doing a short video on it. We've went over it in detail with the kids, and they absorbed it quite well, I believe. I have here David Duringer, The Book Before Printing, Ancient, Medieval, and Oriental, with 185 illustrations. The first Dover edition was published in 1982, however. This book was originally published in 1953, so if you find it valuable, that's why, because it's not recent nonsense from the likes of Brian Greene. Well, he makes movies, but on page 15 or page 14, they have an image it's impossible to see. It might, at the best, look like a little bit of hair hanging down from a piece of string. That's a system used in South America. They didn't ever discover writing or the alphabet. Writing to some extent, but not the alphabet. They had, hieroglyphics at the best. Pictographs or some pictographs. Anyways, this is a system of doing colored knots, taking knots of yarn and string, and you can read it. It's like a computer program of some sort. You can read it and go through and read the knots, the different colors, if you know what it is. And they would tie these knots and stuff, and then take them from one area of the empire to the other to communicate between the kings or whatever was going on. Then on page 20 there's an interesting picture of a deer skin with a story by Native Americans, and it spirals outward. Spirals outward. Let me put that back up there. If it starts in the middle and spirals outward. And I said, what if all of our books were written that way, spiraled outward? The kids thought that was funny. Then they have an instance of an Egyptian wooden wheel they found in exactly the same system, spirals outward. Now you may know that the system of writing was invented, the system of writing we have today, the Phoenician system, that the West has accepted, where a letter stands for a sound instead of standing for a meaning or a word or a concept or something. It stands for just a sound, and you have to put sounds together, and then we have our language, and so we can transcript that. That seems normal to us. It was developed by the Phoenicians in ancient Phoenicia. Now, we use their name to mean sound to this very day. You're going to call somebody on the tele, that's distance, right? Phone, sound, the distance sounder. I'm going to get on the distance sounder and call somebody, the telephone. I don't know how the word phony would go, so let's not go there. I asked the kids, you know what hooked on phonics is? They all know phonics, and they tell me, they say, yeah, that's what they used to teach us in school, and then I have them explain to me what they do, and it's the look-say method. It's not hooked on phonics. They don't use hooked on phonics, but they tell the kids, this is phonics. You're going to learn by phonics. We're teaching you by phonics. The kids actually know the word, and the kids actually tell me, this is how we learn it. We learn it by phonics. The teachers told us we're learning by phonics. Wrong. They're learning the look-say method. Anyway, so phonics comes from the Phoenicians. They didn't develop writing as such, though. That goes back a little bit further. There was cuneiform, which means triangle writing, on clay tablets. There's a little triangle, a little pointed stylus, and you push that into the clay tablets, and then when they dry, there you go. And we found whole libraries of clay tablets in collapsed Babylonian cities or whatever, in these big mounds. Whole libraries collapsed, and they just build over them, and voila, 4,000 years later we got a gold mine of information, or 6,000 years later, 5,000. The earliest ones we found have little figurines imprinted in the mud, like this guy brought 3 lambs, or he brought 4 sheep, or he brought 5 bundles of grain on the barge. Then later on we find weird looking shapes. Not really, it's not an indentation of a little figurine. I mean, they actually made little figurines to push into this stuff. It's not indentation of a little figurine, it's just a marking with something, any tool, and from that cuneiform develops after a while. Anyways, fast forward, the Phoenicians come up with the alphabet, then we go to Greece. The Romans did not have the alphabet until the Greeks got it. Now, I want to look at books for a while. Papyrus was brought up in Egypt, but not until later on. Originally, the Greeks and Romans used the leather. Leather's a bit expensive for a book, but it's durable. If you do it right, if you tan it right or whatever, prepare it right, leather can work for a book, but it's not ideal. Parchment is a particular type of leather, sheepskin, prepared in a particular way. So parchment wasn't the original leather that books were written on. There was, in fact, the Ionian word for book, I don't have it with me now, I don't know which book it was in, but the Ionian word for book is the same as the Greek word for leather. Identical word. So the Greeks and the Romans used leather for books, but they also used parchment at some point. And in fact, they used other things. There were wax plates. They'd have a polished piece of wood with a thin layer of wax on it, and then a little wooden border around the edge. I have a picture of just exactly one here. I don't know how well it'll come through. Each little page, though, is a little wax reservoir, very shallow and thin, and you can scratch out things on it that are legible. A wax book. That one has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 pages. Can't imagine you could write too closely and too small a script too clearly. Palm leaves were used as writing material in the Philippines. Wood was used as a writing material in many places, including just writing on a trunk or a limb or something, and you just write the story along and you write it, and so you can sort of turn it as a drum or whatever. Linen was actually used early in Roman times. Livy mentions it, but the books didn't exist in his time. He mentioned ancient instances of linen being used to write books on. And from the Greeks and Romans, where they developed, got to the state of parchment, and it then just sort of died off. Nothing was done for a long, long time, unfortunately, until a man named Gutenberg helped things out. I told this to the kids in some detail, how he made the little pieces of typeface to go in the machines or whatever. Each little letter had to be made, and I didn't tell him where I was taking them. I showed a little diagram. I said, you're going to carve a letter out in a hole in this wood thing, you pour metal in here. Anyways, all this stuff, and they were very fascinated by it, and many of them grasped for the first time how you make a book. That a book is made by placing little teeny letters into a tray and then pressing a sheet on it, and that's extremely laborious and takes many of these little letters, and they have to all be very high quality, and they have to fit well on the page and stuff. Fascinating subject that they took for granted until we went over in detail. Gutenberg and How One Man Remade the World with Words by John Mann. Haven't read it, but it's got some good stuff in it that I've picked through, especially some illustrations in the middle. So I recommend that if you want to dive further into the subject. Now, to finish off our discussion, I just want to show you the 300 Chinese primary elements. These are the 300 primary elements. Now, I believe in Japan, if you pick up a newspaper or something, a regular publication, it is not, I think that they are restricted to 200 characters, or probably 2,000. About 2,000 characters generally. You don't have to be too worried about special bizarre characters you know nothing about. And can you imagine a dictionary in Japan or China? I'm sure there's methodology to the way that they add their marks, but boy, God help us, I'm glad we have the alphabet. Oh, they'll catch up with us someday. The whole East is going to have to convert to English at some point. They got to go over to the phonetic system, because hieroglyphics or whatever system you want to call what they're doing is ancient.